Good evening, everyone, and I hope your Monday's going well. We have another wonderful show for you tonight. I often hear, mostly business people, I've been looking at some business, videos on, and I was listening to some videos from Mr. Wonderful. You may know him from Shark Tank, Kevin O'Leary. And he was talking today, and someone's asking him, how do you make important decisions? And he says, well, I use my gut. It comes from the gut. And so I sort of chuckled at that in light of the show we're having tonight, because we're going to be talking about the gut. In particular, the microbiome is a very important part of our body's physiology. And the gut is one important area of the microbiome that we're going to discuss at length. And so we have a very special guest on tonight, and I look forward to this discussion. So we're going to start making decisions with our gut, learning more about our gut in terms of how it influences many other parts of our body, our cardiovascular system, our neurological system, and the like, and our overall health, you should say. So I look forward to this discussion tonight. I expect to learn a lot, or anticipate learning a lot. Before I bring our guest on, I'm going to bring our panelists on. We have with us tonight Celeste, our resident pediatrician here in Houston. Celeste, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm well.
Hope your Monday's going well.
Yeah.
And Pamela Brewer, our medicine doctor here in Houston. Pamela, how's it going?
Good evening. Doing well. Good to see you all.
Good. Let me turn my speaker down. I have it up too much. I was listening to other shows today. Well, as I said, we have a very special guest tonight, and we have a lot of information to cover. So I'm not going to delay too much. Dr. Liz Lipsky is a professor and director of academic development for the graduate programs of clinical nutrition at Maryland University of Integrative Health. She's the owner of Innovative Healing Academy and author of Digestive Wellness, now in its 5th edition. She holds a PhD in clinical nutrition. She's a fellow of the American College of Nutrition and has 2 board certifications in clinical nutrition and 1 in functional medicine. She's on the faculty for the Institute of Functional Medicine and the Metabolic Medicine Institute Fellowship Program. She's on the board of the American Nutrition Association and advisory boards for the Certification of International Health Coaches and the Autism Hope Alliance. Dr. Lipsky has been a co-author in peer-reviewed papers and is the author of several books: Digestive Wellness for Children, and Leaky Gut Syndrome, and a video course, The Art of Digestive Wellness. After 30 years of clinical practice, she devotes her time to teaching, writing, and building the field of personalized nutrition. Without further ado, Dr. Lipsky, welcome this night. How are you doing this evening?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Dr. Baxter. It's really fun to be here with all of you.
Yeah, so, the microbiome is a hot topic, and, we dabble in helping our patients. I see patients all the time who come in and have digestive issues, reflux, and, everybody's on a proton pump inhibitor and they're on all sorts of things. And so, I look forward to you covering the topic. We're going to do this in 2 parts, just for our listeners. Part 1, we're going to talk about the fundamentals, the basic anatomy and function of the gut, the microbiome. We're going to talk about what contributes to normal and abnormal gut microbiome, and symptoms of abnormal microbiome. So you're going to kind of get you to lay the groundwork for the underlying, physiology and pathophysiology and related symptoms. And then part 2, we're going to get into the therapeutic aspect. What are practical treatments, and question about pre and probiotics and medications and the like. So, I really look forward to what you have now. We have a wonderful slide presentation here. And can y'all see that? I can see that very well. I hope you guys can see it very well also. Liz, as I said in the introduction, this whole issue of the microbiome, and we prescribe probiotics, and lots of other people prescribe probiotics. But can you start us off and give us an understanding of what we're dealing with the microbiome as it pertains to the gut? If there's some other related organ systems that's pertinent, feel free to discuss that. But get us started on that. And so maybe we could have some basic understanding of what we're dealing with.
Okay, so first of all, the main thing that we need to know is the digestive system is a really interesting system all by itself. And it's the main reason why we eat food. The whole reason why we put food into our body is to get nourishment to every single cell in your body. And if that's compromised in any way, you're not going to feel good, because we get energy from our food. Our digestive system is mainly is the main bulk of the immune system. And when you think about that, you go, well, why would that be? And you think about, well, every day we take pounds of food and we put it in our body, and our body has to decide, is this a friend? Is this a stranger? Is this a dangerous stranger? Who did you just eat? And what did you just eat? And unfortunately, according to new research, the average American's eating over 70% as their food every day is ultra-processed food. And one of the concepts that we could talk about another time is the whole idea of food is information. And it's very much so with the microbiome, because the food that we eat interacts with our microbiome, which interacts with our genome.
Excuse me, doctors, I'm sorry, you said 70% of the food is ultra-processed?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Let me make a note of that.
Yeah, 70% is ultra processed. They use this food system called the NOVA system. So, for example, if I eat an apple, that's level 1. And the things that would make that apple taste delicious, like sugar and butter and oil and salt and spices, that's level 2. And so if I take those things and I make an apple cobbler, let's say, that's level 3. That's a processed food, but it's not an ultra processed food because it's still whole foods. So 70% of what we're eating is what comes in those packages in the grocery stores that will sit on your shelf for a year or 2 and still be perfectly good.
I need to let you look at my food classification system. It has a similar process. In other words, this NOVA system, the less processed, the lower the number. The more processed, the higher the number.
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay. So anyway, the digestive system, as you were saying, like how it expresses displeasure is we feel pain, gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation. You know, that's what we know about that's in the digestive system. But as what's in the digestive system doesn't necessarily stay in the digestive system. And so we have this new topic called the microbiome, right? And the Human Microbiome Project really just started 15 years ago at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. They were saying, okay, what is it and who's there? And not only we started it in the United States, but Canada took a piece and China took a piece and India took a piece. And everybody started looking at this microbiome. And I think that the main impetus for doing that was because what we know is that the Human Genome Project finished in the early 200s, and we were so surprised because we only had about 24,000, 25,000 coding genes. But what we know is that the bacteria, viruses, and fungi that are in the microbiome like dwarf that 150 to 1. Most of the genetic material that's in your body and my body is microbes. We're less than 1% of the DNA in your body and my body is human. So then the question is, well, who really hosts who? And sometimes I think we're just a big sack to like make a good environment for these microbes. But these microbes, when they're, you know, like a symphony, when they're in harmony, we feel great. And when they're in disharmony, which we call dysbiosis, we don't feel that great. So where are they? Almost all of them are in your colon. Okay, I mean, a huge amount of these are in your colon. We have a little tiny bit in our stomach, not so much because our stomach has a lot of stomach acid, which kills the microbes. And that's one of its main purposes, is to like kill bacteria and fungi and viruses that come in our food. And so we want that to be really low. In the small intestine, we have, some lactobacilli and some microbes, but the great bulk of them's in our colon. And we have somewhere between 3 and 7 pounds of these microbes that live on our skin and in our nasal passages and in our genitourinary tract and in our ears and in our nose. And but the great bulk of them's in the colon. And we have as many bacteria alone in our colon as we have cells in our body. And we have 10 times the number of viruses in our microbiome, called our Virum, as we do bacteria or cells of the body. And a lot of those, we're just starting to understand who they are, but a lot of them, they actually do signaling. And I think of them almost as shepherds for the bacteria. Move here, do this, do that. They're kind of the bosses of the bacteria. And when they see the bacteria out of balance, they can also gobble them up and send messages and say, hey, you don't belong here anymore. Let's get rid of you. And as I said, the DNA in these microbes is over 99% of the DNA in our bodies. And in our mouths, we have somewhere between 200 and 300 different types of microbes. And as we move down, we each have somewhere around maybe 400 or 500 different types of microbes in our microbiome. And the fascinating piece of this is that our microbiomes are as unique as our fingerprints. And so they're looking all the time like, well, what is a normal microbiome? And what does that look like? And what I would say is it's really different. So if you eat mainly plant-based diet, you're going to have a lot more of a main category of microbes called Prevotella. And if you eat more of a animal protein-based diet, you're going to have more of the Bacteroidetes. And so we know that diet affects the microbiome a lot. And we talk about the microbiome, but the truth is that we have dozens and dozens of different microbiomes in our body. So I read one study that said that the microbiome of my right hand and my left hand were only 70% the same. Why? Because I do different things with these hands. And what we know is if you just kind of look at the colors here, and you can see like the mouth or saliva, you can see that the dark brown, which is the Firmicutes, and the yellow, the Bacteroides, are the biggest groups, followed by Proteobacteria. But then you look at the gingiva, our gums, and it has the same ones, but the balance is different. If you look at the tongue, again, the balance is different. And so we've got these microbiota of pretty much every organ. They're starting to study the microbiota of the brain and the liver. At first they were just looking kind of at our surfaces. And now I woke up one night about 4 or 5 years ago with an epiphany. I'm like, I can't wait to see the research on the microbiome of the pancreas or the kidneys, and we're starting to see those papers come out. So that's a little bit of like, what is it? And then the other question you asked me is like, what influences it, right? So some of the things that are on the left are the things most of us can't control anymore. They already happened in our lives. So whether we were born by vaginally or by C-section, you have a different developing microbiome, which if your mom is feeding you right and breastfeeding you, you should be able to catch up eventually. If you've been breastfed versus bottle fed, you have a different microbiome. If you have dogs, not so much cats, but dogs, or if you grew up on a farm around farm animals, you're going to have a different and healthier microbiome because it's going to have more diversity. And what we know about diversity in pretty much every aspect of life is diversity breeds resilience.
So let's say you were raised on a farm, but then and let's say you're breastfed and raised on a farm, but then your family moved, you're 10 years old, and then you go live in a city and you eat an overly processed food. That fundamental microbiome that was laid out based on your breastfeeding and living on a farm as a youth, can that be fundamentally changed with a drastic change in your lifestyle and environment?
It can, but what's really interesting is what we know at this moment in time about the microbiome is that the infant and toddler microbiome really sets up our immune system for our whole life. And it sets up whether we're going to be fat or thin, or whether we have a greater tendency to develop diabetes or obesity, and so those first like 3 years or so are so critical. And what's interesting is, you can undo a lot of that by bad habits and highly processed food and not exercising and not getting enough sleep and taking tons of antibiotics. But the basic foundation that you start with is good, and it can bounce back better than somebody who didn't start off well. And so, I'm concerned about the children who've been given antibiotics over and over and over, and maybe Dr. Palmer has something to say about this. A resident pediatrician,
I'm also very concerned about that. And I try to teach the parents that, because I think parents feel like antibiotics are going to take care of whatever illness it is, whether it's viral or bacterial. They think that antibiotics will cure all. And I think it's a large misunderstanding. And so it has to be a re-education, so parents aren't just willingly giving their children antibiotics because the child has sniffles. Because I think the impact is going to be major, and we'll see it maybe in a couple more years, and we may be seeing it now. Because a lot of children, we're starting antibiotics sometimes as early as 6 months for ear infections. And then once you start down that road, the ear infections keep coming back. They go to different doctors, they go to urgent cares, they go to the emergency room, and everybody's piling on more antibiotics. So definitely, I think it probably affects, I can't make a direct correlation, but the allergies that we're seeing, the increase in asthma that we're seeing, and so all of these little things are impacting each other. So it's some educating we have to do, and some work we have to do to get the parents to understand what's going on.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because, I think, I forget, the American Academy of Pediatrics for over 15 years has been saying, don't just necessarily give antibiotics for
Ear infection
unless it's an inner ear infection.
Right.
Because what we know is exactly what you said. The more often you give antibiotics, the more often you're going to need to give antibiotics. But if you do other things like comfrey mullein oil in the ears with garlic, or some herbal things, the child or the baby starts learning, its own immune system starts figuring out how to work with this.
Yeah.
I just thought of something, the comment you made earlier has got my brain moving 1,000 miles an hour. And, I was talking to a colleague, actually I was preparing for a podcast, and actually I was talking about PA and some other people about the whole issue of complex patients. And, we treat patients with advanced heart disease and the latter. And, one of the nurses and the PA was noticing one of our patients, they, bounce back much better than others. And I'm just wondering to myself, should I start taking pediatric histories in my adult patients? So if I have two patients, heart failure patient A and heart failure patient B, and they both come in, their ejection fraction are less than 20%, and they've got, diabetes or whatever they have. But then heart patient A was delivered through vaginal delivery, breastfed, and didn't take a lot of antibiotics, and grew up on a farm, but then he developed heart failure after he moved to the city. But then heart failure patient B was bottle fed, C-section, grew up in the city, never played outdoors, got a lot of antibiotics. am I going to have more trouble reversing heart failure B than heart failure A?
I honestly don't know. But if, because I haven't looked specifically at that research, but what we do know is that healthy people bounce back better, and so you'd have to look at all the rest of their life. One of the things that I use, I'm not in practice anymore, but I used to ask people to fill out a timeline of events in their lives, and to fill that out and bring it. And if they needed to tape it together, some people would tape 6 or 7 pages together and bring in a timeline. Because mostly when people come in for a visit with a physician, we're focusing on what's happening right now. Mm-hmm. But we know that 80% of why people come to see us is because of something that's recurring in their life history, or because of an earlier event in their life. We know adverse childhood events have a huge effect on us long term. And we start looking at what are going to be the adverse outcomes of the children of COVID, right? The little kids who are sitting in front of Zoom all day, or not able to because they don't even have a computer. And so they're falling behind in school. And so, I think one of the gifts that I have of being a nutritionist is I get to sit with people for a really long time and ask them a lot of questions about their life and about kind of the breadth of their life. And I know that when I'm working with somebody with really complex health issues, if we don't address the gut microbiome, their diet, their lifestyle, and leaky gut, which is actually increased permeability of the intestine, if we don't look at all of that, it's going to be really hard to get them well. And one of the things we do say is we go leaky gut, leaky skin, leaky brain, leaky heart, leaky lungs, because they all have their microbiota, but a lot of it is driven by the microbiome in the gut.
I'm still fascinated by the concept of the foundation being set at a very young age, because it's striking and it makes a lot of sense because, as you alluded to from the emotional standpoint, the psychiatrists have known this for a long time. And they always go back to your childhood or whatever the case is, because they know that impacts how you behave now. And I think the biochemistry and physiology of where we started is affecting how we are now. And I think a heart failure patient or diabetes patient, that may explain why some patients bounce back better than others. And I think that in our next study, we could probably look at those questions. We could do a simple questionnaire. Dr. Celeste Palmer is going to help me create it, where we look at the history of patients. We put them in a study and we look at who has the most drastic improvements versus who has the less. I don't know, that may shed some light on this and could have a big impact on how we manage our patients.
And Dr. Montgomery, I do think you have to kind of account for, I feel like a shift is happening because the last 20 years is going to be different than the next 20 years. So,
well, sure, yeah.
Right.
But I think a lot of the patients we're seeing now, I'm seeing young people in their 20s and 30s who are part of some of this, bad shift. Right.
Because the certain things didn't exist 20 years ago that are just general that's happening now. There didn't used to be every kind of fast food on every corner. There was fast food. I'm not saying it was fast food, but it wasn't something that we were doing as a country on a regular basis, where cooking becomes kind of secondary and stopping by fast food to grab something to eat is more primary. So that the mindset has changed. And also I think when we're talking about the microbiome, people, just not even the physical part, but teaching a child that every time you get sick, you go to the doctor and get antibiotics means that when they are 25, every time they get sick, they're going to the doctor to get antibiotics. So then they continue that cycle of continuously damaging their microbiome throughout their life.
That's amazing. Well, Dr. Lipsky, I know we've interrupted you a lot. This is striking. You hit us with several bombshells. But go ahead. We're still going to cover the underlying physiology, and we'll take a station break and then go to part 2 on some of the treatment. But go ahead.
Okay, so I just want to kind of show you when it's out of balance, we're so used to thinking about a real infection, but it can be an infection, but just out of balance, more like this, like it's more like a seesaw, teeter-totter, you know? And so in there, in the microbiome, we have beneficial microbes that we might call probiotics, and prebiotics are the food for the microbiota. And then we have commensals, which I think a lot of these commensals, we just don't know who they are and what they do yet. I think a lot of them will be considered probiotics once we study them well. And then we also have pathogens. And in medicine, we focus on the pathogens. But what we really need is this balance of all of these, because when we have plenty of these kind of good microbes and the commensals, which are considered to be really good also, but we just don't really know yet how much they do and what they do. To be labeled a probiotic, you have to have a study that says this particular microbe helps with allergies or eczema or IBS, or it's very specific. So a lot of these just haven't been studied yet. So dysbiosis is when we're just out of balance. And
so the pathogen, I'm sorry. I mean, again, this is, so if somebody has a fever and an infection, and I draw their blood and I grow E. coli, Pseudomonas, is it possible that that's an unbalanced microbe that's just overgrowing, and so therefore it's getting into the bloodstream?
Yes, but but there are, like there are beneficial E. coli.
Yes.
There's even probiotics that are made out of E. coli. It's called E. coli Nissl strain. And it's really useful for people with inflammatory bowel disease and IBS. So, E. coli isn't E. coli. Clostridia isn't always a pathogen. There's beneficial Clostridia bacteria. So, but pathogens, like we're dealing with a pathogen right now. We're dealing with COVID, right? So, what we have to think about a pathogen is how good is somebody's overall health? How young are they? We're finding out, right? Do they have co-founding factors? Because all that helps determine like how badly somebody might get hit, and also how contagious is this pathogen. And some pathogens aren't very contagious and some are more contagious. And so we're so used to thinking about medicine about, like naming a disease. Dysbiosis isn't usually a named pathogen. It's more just a general milieu that it's out of balance.
Gotcha.
So I wanted to show you this because this is a little bit about type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, inflammatory bowel disease, and kind of how the healthy gut versus the dysbiotic gut works just in general. And so what we see is that when on the left side of the screen, if you have a healthy gut, then you have less of this permeability in your small intestine. That permeability is associated with all autoimmune disease, heart disease, diabetes, so many other things. And that's a whole nother lecture. But how it happens is that when we're really stressed out and when we're exposed to different kinds of pathogenic microbes or particles from microbes called lipopolysaccharides, that what happens is that food molecules, bacteria, fungi, parasites, food chemicals like glyphosate and colors and dyes, a lot of these things can pass right into the bloodstream. And when they do that, it causes inflammation, and it also tells the immune system, hey, this doesn't belong here. And so the cells might not even get what they're looking for. The endotoxemia is these lipopolysaccharides that can come into the bloodstream. And then we start having a pro-inflammatory response when things are out of balance. But when they're in balance, it's all kept in check. And we also have these short chain fatty acids in the bowel that help like keep the colon and the rest of the body in good health. But when this is out of balance, what we see is all the opposite. And you can see in the bottom left that when you have dysbiosis, it opens you up to heart disease, diabetes, obesity, inflammatory bowel disease, and other inflammatory conditions. And so when we look at the symptoms of dysbiosis, we see people with food sensitivities, we see gas and indigestion, we see hypertension, we can see depression or anxiety, cystic acne, fatigue, fatty liver disease, restless leg syndrome is associated with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. But when we also look at when I look at the research on different diseases and the microbiome, you look and you go, oh my gosh, like what isn't affected by a microbiome that's out of balance? And we're seeing a lot about the gut brain these days, because we know that and that's a whole nother lecture, but the brain and the gut are connected with the vagal nerve and the hypothalamus adrenal pituitary axis. And we know that the information going back and forth between our brain and our digestive system is two ways, but most of it, 90%, goes from the gut to the brain. So when the gut's out of balance, these food molecules cause leaky brain, and we get inflammation in the brain, and then people don't think well, or maybe they're depressed or anxious. So many times when I was in practice, I was working with somebody with maybe IBS and depression and anxiety, or maybe working with somebody with schizophrenia. And we would do some sort of elimination diet, get rid of eggs and dairy and gluten-containing grains and sugar and alcohol and preservatives and things. And what would happen is, like, within a couple weeks, you see people, their mood changes, their energy changes, their mind changes, their pain levels change. So we'll talk more about that in the second half. And I just threw in a couple of little slides here about kind of like what we know is a basic slide, but a healthy lung microbiome, there's overlap between that and somebody with asthma or cystic fibrosis, but they look really different. And so when we're healthy, different tissues, microbiomes, look different than when they're diseased. And then this was a slide that I found, and it says pretty much the same thing about the possible role of the gut microbiota in modulating the immune response in COVID-19. And it's really the same thing. It's like, if we've got a gut that's in balance, we're going to go through this more easily. And this is just proposed. We don't have big studies on it yet. But, you know, I just wanted to bring that up as a possible mechanism. And then we can put this in part two, some of the causes of this imbalance.
Okay, well, that's great. You know, this is a great breakaway, and, you know, those slides are quite impressive, and, you know, I've made notes of a number of questions. And I do have a question from Nicole real quick before we go to the station break, and I think it's quite impressive. She wants to know about a child who grows up on a farm that uses lots of pesticides. You know, the last 20 years, farms have not been organic. So I guess it's one aspect of growing up on a farm, but she wants to know about pesticides. So I guess the specifics of that environment, any comments on that?
Well, I think that we don't really know all the answers to any of this yet, because the research is also new. I think that, you know, it's like we always look, like I eat organic foods because I know that they're more nutrient dense. Not everybody can afford to do that, but we do know, like glyphosate, it plays a horrible role, which is the main ingredient in Roundup and the genetically engineered crops that we're using. It really causes leaky gut. It causes dysbiosis. It's not good for us. And the World Health Organization has classified it as a probable carcinogen. So when we look at all that, you know, pesticides, not really great. So if you grew up on a farm, you were exposed to a lot of pesticides, but you lived around animals and your parents made mostly homemade food, you know, it's a toss-up. You're way healthier in your foundation than somebody who didn't grow up on a farm and eat homemade food and was eating fast food all the time. So, you know, our environment, and you can see, you know, dysbiosis are environmental toxins, which again, oh my gosh, I think we live in a cesspool. We are just continuously polluting ourselves. My husband just bought a new shelf for our garage, and he bought it for me specifically because I could put my home canned things on it and some of my pantry items, and it was a gift to me. And it's made with particle board, and I walk into the garage and it smells terrible. And I'm like, okay, so now I'm breathing in these chemicals, and I'm glad it's in the garage, but we don't even think about that, you know. We buy clothes, they smell like Febreze. I don't know why everything smells like scented, but all of those scents are not good for us. They're hormone disruptors, and they're microbiome disruptors, and they're metabolism disruptors. We see way more diabetes in people who are exposed to chemicals. So, you know, this is another one of my like rampages, and I'm not going to take you all the way through it, but you know, basically, you know, one of the things that's really important to me is self-care. So much of our own health is in our own hands, and I think all three of you as physicians know this and teach this to your patients. It's like the more we can get people to eat well and sleep well and love their work and have good relationships and you know, do things that are good for themselves, the healthier they're going to be overall and over the decades.
Very impactful, I have to say. We'll go to a quick little station break, and we'll come back on part two. And on part two, we'll talk about aspects of treatment. So we got a good understanding of, you know, what lays out a normal microbiome, contributing factors, and abnormal microbiome. But given that, you know, many of us in the terrible state we're in, so what can we do about it? So we'll address that after this break. Okay, we're back with the group here. I figured we'd just go straight into part two. So this is great information. So here we are now. We many of us on the show are adults, and you know, maybe we were breastfed, maybe we weren't, maybe we grew up on a farm, maybe we didn't. So we can't change those things. But so many of our listeners may be dealing with chronic illnesses. So now the issue is, you know, what are some of the things we can do, you know, for the microbiome? Now, with the common thing out there that I'll know is get a probiotic, and every health store has a probiotic. And so, you know, hopefully we'll address some of those things. So what are some of the ways that we can improve our microbiome, or what's known to be good?
Okay. So, let me just kind of move forward. Okay, so modulating the microbiome. So my main way of modulating the microbiome is with food. And we know that plant foods, all of our fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, legumes, and beans, these foods have the greatest effect on normalizing the microbiome. And that's not saying everybody can eat all of these foods, because some people cannot. Protein, we have some research showing that a plant-based diet actually is of greater benefit to the diversity and robustness of the microbiome. We have a small amount of research that polyunsaturated fatty acids, like in nuts and seeds and whole grains, and CLA, conjugated linoleic acid from dairy products, also have benefits to the microbiome, because they actually act as a prebiotic. Think of prebiotic as food for the microbes in your microbiome. And then we also know that carbohydrates like soluble fiber, resistant starch, and other fibers can be really helpful for the composition of the microbiome. We also know that eating too much sugar has just the opposite effect. And And we also know that the colors in foods, when you eat a diet that looks like a huge rainbow of food, that all those colors, those polyphenols and those plant bioactives and the spices and herbs that we use in our foods feed the microbiome. And all of those are called prebiotics. So I like probiotics, and I personally take probiotics often, but I think the magic is really in our food. And what we know from research paper after research paper, diet has the most powerful influence on the gut microbial communities in healthy human subjects, and I would say also in sick ones. And 75% of the food in the Western diet is limited or no benefit to the microbiota. So when I look at that and then we start looking, we go, okay, well, what do we know about some of the foods in the microbiome? And what we know is that when we start eating, a lot of saturated fats, when we have a lot of sugar and red meat, what we see is that there's more inflammation, more the things that probably are protective are things like fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and beans and things like salmon. And, so starting to think about food as information. Do you want the food that you eat to be inflammatory, or do you want it to be healthful? And I think for me, thinking about food as information rather than thinking about the calories or the nutrients that are in it, like, what do I really want from this food? I do want a balance. So I wanted to show you this paper that was done by David and Maurice and their colleagues. And what they did was they took 9 people and they put them on 2 different diets. They put them on a plant-based diet for 5 days or an animal-based diet for 5 days. The plant-based diet was grains, vegetables, legumes, a good vegan diet. And the meat-based diet had a lot of meat, eggs, and cheese. And so they did, each one of them did both of these diets with a washout period in between. And if you look at person A, you can see they have a baseline. And then within 24 hours, there was a huge change on the plant-based diet in person A. And as soon as they stopped eating that plant-based diet, everything went back to normal again, pretty much. And then when they were on the animal-based diet, they had an opposite response. And this is based on the genetics of what they saw in the microbiome. But when you look at person B had exactly the opposite response. And so to me, or person C also, and then person D, you see, it didn't really matter what they ate. And person E, nothing really changed on the plant-based diet for that person, but and maybe because they'd been eating a lot of plant all the time anyway, but when they went on a meat-based diet, something really shifted. And so I get a bunch of different things from this data. One is that you can change your gut microbiome in 24 hours based on what you eat. 2, that different diets are going to work better for different people. And 3, what you're going to find from this and with any other diet is that you're not going to get the maximum benefits unless you keep doing it long term. And so eating more vegetables and fruits and fiber is going to give you more diversity, more resilience of your microbiome. But it's not what you do, 2 days a week. It's how you eat all the time. And so encouraging people to really see food as medicine and to put more plant foods in their diet is so critically important. And that said, I have students at my university and they're, eating a ketogenic diet with lots of plants, and they're feeling better on that. So we always have to look. For me, when I see that people don't do well on a lot of plant foods and carbohydrate foods, I'm starting to think that they have dysbiosis. So diversity matters. So I think I've said kind of all of this, but how you eat, what can you do? And this comes from Gut Microbiota for Health. And they have really kind of great blog articles and all kinds of things on the microbiome, but eat a diverse diet and make sure that you're getting a high fiber diet filled with prebiotics and probiotic-rich foods. So I'm going to walk through those. Choose a balanced amount of animal and plant-based proteins, and include foods rich in omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, so nuts and seeds and grains and avocados and foods like that. And then, eat a nutrient-dense diet. The more diverse your diet, the more diverse your microbiota, and the more diversity, the more resilience. So I put this together for my course, but I wanted to just show you that fiber, the average person is only getting half as much fiber as we need. And fiber regulates digestion, but is also the insoluble fibers, the prebiotic fibers, the resistant starch is what reduces inflammation through the body and can regulate insulin and hemoglobin A1C and build bone. And you think, really, just eating fiber can have all this benefit, but it's so important for us to increase the amount of fiber that we eat for the microbiome. There's just some references. And then, as I mentioned, the prebiotics selectively get fermented by the microbes of the microbiome, and they start breaking down the fibers. And what's so fascinating to me is that the prebiotic-rich foods, which are your plant foods, all of your plant foods and your colorful foods, when we eat plant foods, the colors and the other bioactive components in those and the fibers get gobbled up by the microbiome, and they are food for the microbiome. But at the same time, what we know about putting cinnamon on your oatmeal, or cooking with oregano and thyme, or cooking with more vegetables, what we know is that they reduce inflammation. But what you probably didn't know is that none of those bioactives or polyphenols are really active until they get gobbled up by the microbiome. They estimate that only 5% of our plant foods are actually available, to do all the really good things that we know that they do until they get gobbled up by the microbes. And so I love this relationship. It's a beautiful marriage.
But let me ask you though, I'm sorry to interrupt, but so if someone has a severe dysbiosis such that they have a low number of healthy microbes, then they will not digest these nutrients, and so supplements or foods that they take in may not be as effective. Is that correct?
It is. And I think I can go to one of these other slides. What I want to show you is this slide. So when I'm working with somebody who has irritable bowel syndrome, or they have eosinophilic esophagitis, or they have even GERD sometimes, which is heartburn or gastroesophageal reflux, or I'm working with somebody with inflammatory bowel disease or any other dysbiosis or autoimmune disease, I'm going to usually pick a diet that's actually carbohydrate restricted for a short amount of time, 3 months probably, because I want to starve out all of those microbes that don't belong, and then we want to replenish. And so we have different kinds of diets. So the low FODMAP diet is the best studied for people with irritable bowel syndrome, which looks like gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, alternating constipation, diarrhea. The low FODMAP diet would be the diet of choice right now. And there's actually an app from the University of Monash that makes it really easy to follow this, because it uses kind of a red, green, yellow, like what can I eat and what can't I eat? And there's recipes on there as well. There's certainly a lot more ethnically appropriate recipes that you can find online as well, for different populations. But I've also found that if somebody has a lot of IBS, maybe it's just a gluten or a dairy intolerance, or maybe they have undiagnosed celiac disease. And I've gotten really amazing results with kind of an egg-free, dairy-free, gluten-free diet with people with arthritis and autoimmune disease and a lot of other conditions. The specific carbohydrate diet is the best studied for people with eosinophilic esophagitis, which is really like asthma of the esophagus. And we're seeing more and more and more of it. And then we also have, elemental diets that are used to calm things down. We have antifungal diets. And, what's in common with a lot of these are that we're really restricting carbohydrates temporarily so that we can restore the balance of the microbiome. So, what I'm telling you about is eating lots of probiotic-rich foods and prebiotic-rich foods and lots of plant foods. For those of us who have a pretty healthy gut, that's what we want to do to maintain health and to keep it beautiful. But when we're out of balance, sometimes we have to kind of go back to ground zero. And I'll tell you a story about one client that I worked with. He was obese, he was depressed. His main complaint when he came to see me was that he was self-employed and that he had such bad irritable bowel syndrome and gas and bloating and pain that he couldn't work about 10 days a month. And that was really devastating to his finances, which caused huge amounts of stress. He was also, he was on cholesterol-lowering medication. He was on SSRI for his depression. He was on a diuretic for his high blood pressure. And everything was being treated separately. But what he told me was that, I said, well, when was the last time you felt really well? And he said, even when I was a kid, I can remember like having to run into the bushes to have diarrhea on the way walking home from school. And I said, boy, okay. So I referred him back to his doctor and I said, I want you to be tested for celiac disease because this has been going on your whole life. And, he tested negative for celiac, but in the meantime, I had recommended what I call a comprehensive elimination diet. And what it looked like was he could have fish and he could have chicken and he could have pork and he could have buffalo and he could have lamb, things that he didn't usually eat in his diet that much. And he could eat all vegetables, all fruits, non-gluten containing grains. So he could have rice and he could have buckwheat and he could have grain-like things like amaranth and quinoa. And he could have nuts and seeds and oils. And so he can make a salad and make a nice dressing for it with olive oil and vinegar and things like that. Well, in 2 weeks, he came back and he said, I've lost 8 pounds and I'm not having IBS. And the swelling in my body and the pain, I forgot to mention, he had horrible pain and swelling, was going down. Within a month, he'd lost about 12 pounds. He was off now with his doctor's help. He was off of his antidepressant. He was starting to come off of his diuretic for his hypertension. And so he was starting to feel better. In 3 months, he'd lost 35 pounds. His IBS was 100% gone. His pain and really water retention and swelling throughout his body was gone. He was off all of his medications and he was really happy. And because he was really happy, he started looking at his marriage and realized, this marriage is pretty dysfunctional. And so he and his wife got divorced. So, sometimes just changing your diet can have like enormous impact in your life. Now,
we might call that an adverse effect, but anyway.
Yeah, it could be an adverse effect.
That's a fascinating story. I want to alert our listeners. We're going to go a little bit over. There's some great points you're making. And we're going to get to some of the questions in the chat. You hit on a number of things, probiotics and prebiotics. Do you have a specific recommendation on pre and probiotics? Should we use them if somebody come in with irritable bowel and the like? And yes, we address their diet. We put them on a plant-based diet. We use detox diets in my regimen. Am I right or wrong for starting them on a good probiotic and prebiotic regimen in addition to that?
The evidence for probiotics in irritable bowel syndrome and inflammatory bowel disease is really strong. You know, when they grade it, they give it an A or a B. So it's really strong. So yes, I would do that. And I would also really like start working with somebody's diet. It's so easy to like take a pill to get all of this, but it's really important for people to start doing, if they're taking prebiotics and probiotics as supplements, to also start thinking about those pre and probiotic rich foods as well. And, you know, you don't generally need tons of them in your diet every day, but you do want to start kind of incorporating some of these foods. So I do have some cultured and fermented foods. Here's just some. You know, every culture around the world has different cultured and fermented foods. And so think about what you ate when you were a kid and what came from your culture, or you know, in your church or your synagogue or your mosque, like what kind of things are traditional in your culture? Because, you know, kefir, when I was growing up, and yogurt, they didn't exist in my culture. Now they're everywhere. Or think about people making or eating kombucha. Personally, I'm not Korean, but I love kimchi. And I make kimchi and I have kimchi pretty much every day. Miso soup, I'm not Japanese, but miso soup has over 150 different microbes in it. Talk about being a probiotic-rich food. And what's so interesting is even dead probiotics, like in miso soup that's been boiled, they still modulate digestion and the immune system.
Wow.
I have a quick question, and one of the listeners also asked this, but you know, I know that the food is best, and you know, I do a lot of talking to the patients about food, but sometimes, you know, that's a process to get, especially children, adults, but especially children, to eat some of these foods that will be beneficial for them. So, if we're doing probiotics in a pill form or in a powder form, would you say refrigerated or on the shelf, or not refrigerated?
You know, there are some very good products that come on the shelf, but generally I like the refrigerated ones better because they're in stasis. What they do is they freeze dry them. And once you actually put them in your body with moisture, they come alive again. What you know, like basically, like if I have yogurt, I make yogurt or I buy yogurt and it sits in my fridge for a long time, they cannibalize each other. You know, so, but that said, there's some very good probiotics that are freeze dried and they're shelf stable. And so those can also be used if you know that. But most of the lactobacilli and bifidobacteria, you know, I generally buy ones that are refrigerated. There's another probiotic that I love. It's called Saccharomyces boulardii. And it's actually a yeast. It's a cousin to bread yeast. And I wouldn't give it to somebody who has like who has septicemia or, you know, or is really, really ill. But I would give it to somebody who has fungal overgrowth. I would use it if you need to put somebody on antibiotics. It helps protect against fungal infections. And it has both prebiotic and probiotic effects. It's kind of and it helps us make more short-chain fatty acids, which are protective. It's really an amazing probiotic, and that is shelf-stable without being refrigerated.
Wow. I wanted to ask about soil-based organisms, probiotics. Do you have an opinion about, do you prefer soil-based probiotics or?
So when I look at the research, there is some research now on the soil, on the bacilli, and some of it's impressive. But what I found in practice is there's some people that feel really great on these soil-based microorganisms, and there's some people who feel way worse. And there isn't a way right now to really figure that out other than just keeping an open jar in your office and say, here, take 7 of these kind and 7 of these, and let's just see which one feels better to you. And then you can come in and buy a bottle of them, because the great bulk of the research comes from really the human strains, Lactobacillus plantarum and Lactobacillus acidophilus and bifidobacteria. A lot of those are also found in foods as well, because we grew up with these microbes. And when I first started hearing about the soil-based microorganisms like 20 years ago, all the research was really about how pathogenic they were. And now we're seeing some good research, but I think that the companies who make them are also really good at marketing. And so they might have one paper that demonstrates that this probiotic was really good for prevention of bladder infections in women who get a lot of bladder infections. And then what we start hearing about is they're good for everybody. And so, I'm still waiting for more research, but what I see in practice is some people, they're the best probiotics that they can take, and for other people, they just make them feel worse. And that's true for any probiotic.
Makes sense. Hey, real quick, there are a bunch of great questions in the chat I'm going to get to, but before I get to those questions, one last bullet point I want you to just kind of run through this real quick. Medications, we all have an idea that antibiotics can have an adverse effect on the microbe. What other medications or substances, that we're putting in our system, affects the microbiome of the gut?
Well, I think one of the really big ones is proton pump inhibitors that we're using for GERD. And the reason is because they stop production of stomach acid. And the reason the acid is there is to protect us. It's like one of these protective mechanisms. So we're seeing a lot of fungal overgrowth, and we're seeing a lot of small intestinal bacterial overgrowth in people on proton pump inhibitors. So that's the big one. Steroids can really play a role. Even birth control pills can play a role. I remember when in the dark ages, when I was first on birth control pills in college, I remember getting vaginal yeast infections chronically, from them. They were changing my microbiome. There are a lot of medications that can affect the microbiome. So also when people are using steroids for either because they're downregulating inflammation or because they're doing bodybuilding, you're going to see a real change in the microbiome. And you're going to also, we don't have a lot of research on this, but I'm a kidney transplant patient. And my sister gave me her kidney 15 years ago, for polycystic kidney disease, which is genetic. But anyway, it's the drugs that I have to take, being the immunosuppressants that I take every time I do a test on my microbiome. You would just look at it and go, oh my goodness, this is really a mess. So, it's so important for me to live my life in a balanced way because the drugs that I take really affect them. And the slide that I have up is just to show you how many amazing things probiotics do for you.
Wow.
Yeah, I just like to say, considering the diet, when we take probiotics, we have to understand that when we eat animal products, meats and milks and animals that are exposed to antibiotics, we get them indirectly. So, so we may have to take more and more often if someone is on that type of diet. But that's the benefit of plant-based diet. We're not re-exposing to antibiotics.
That's a great point. No, that's a great point because they're right, because the chemicals that the animals are consuming, we're getting that as well. And so a dynamite point.
Children drinking milk, cow's milk.
That's right. The poison from the cow. Jackie McCrae, wonderful info. She wants to know about also, should you use probiotics that need refrigeration or not? We addressed that we prefer refrigeration. But how many strands should a probiotic for women 60 plus contain? Is there a particular number, 40 million, 50? I don't know.
I wish I knew. Okay. I mean, we don't have that research. And, we've got 3 women on this call, and all 3 of us might benefit from different probiotic. And so the main things that I think of when I think about dosing of probiotics is, what are you using this for? Are you using it because somebody just took antibiotics? Well, then I might dose it 50 or 100 billion colony-forming units for, a bottle's worth. Although we have one study that says the microbiome doesn't bounce back as well when you give probiotics. And so we're kind of in this we don't really know place. But if it's just for kind of health maintenance, I might try 3 to 10 billion colony-forming units. If I was working with somebody who had active ulcerative colitis, I might go up to, like BSL-3, they're using trillions of colony-forming units. And so you have to really kind of look at the person and figure out what's your goal. And I wish that we had answers, but this research is in its infancy. I remember sitting at a research conference a few years ago and listening to my probiotic researchers, and their conclusion is, so we're not ready for people to use probiotics. And I'm like, hey guys, this train has left the station a long time ago, because we've been using them and we're going to continue to use them. And what we're going to start seeing is that as we get better research, we're going to find, well, this probiotic is going to work best for this health condition. And in fact, a few years ago, 8 of my students, I said, I wish I had a paper that could tell me that. And so they came up with almost 200 pages of which probiotics had been studied in which conditions, which probiotic supplements contained those by brand, which foods contain those. And I looked at this paper and I said, oh my gosh, if I'm the only person who ever sees this, what a shame. And so we published them in Integrative Medicine, and they're called Probiotics and Disease. And if you just kind of look them up on PubMed, they're open source and you can download them. And a lot of clinicians are using them as just a great resource. There's also the Probiotic Advisor, which is comes out of Australia, and it's a membership website, but I think it's $50 or $100 a year, and they do the same thing, and they say, well, this is what's been researched best for obesity, or this is what's been researched best for depression or anxiety. And so we're starting to get these, and so we're starting to see really specific probiotics that are designed around mood, or designed around bowel regulation, or designed around irritable bowel syndrome, or designed around weight loss. And again, and so we're just really at the beginning of all this, but it's a pretty interesting and exciting revolution.
Can you send me a reference on that, if you don't mind, the one that you guys published?
Sure.
Wonderful. Just email it to me. That'd be great. Gwendolyn, and we addressed this to some extent. You had a slide on this about healthy gut microbiome that helps the lung fight COVID-19. I think what you said was that theoretically it can work, but we don't have studies to show that.
We don't. We're just too new in all of this. But, what we do know is that young, healthy people seem to just kind of breeze through this better than older people. And I also see is how do healthy older people breeze through this better than unhealthy? And what effects does our lifestyle play? And food is the biggest thing we do that causes inflammation or causes health in our body. And so to me, the fundamentals of lifestyle and food are really the root system of our overall health. And that's so in our hands.
Wow. Zorro wants to know about Prevotella bacteria and how it could it neutralize older and Bacteroides bacteria?
Well, it's not that it neutralizes it. What it does is that when we eat certain foods, we make more of different kinds of microbes because it's food for the different bugs. And so again, like as we, for example, a low FODMAP diet, how that works is you stop feeding the bugs that cause gas and bloating.
Zorro wants to just let us know that when he used the restroom at work, it smells better when he leaves than when he went there. So maybe he's got some.
Can I throw a question in, Dr. Montgomery?
Sure.
So I know that we were talking about the baby C-section versus vaginal delivery earlier, and I know that in some countries, I don't know if we're doing it here, they are actually doing vaginal swabs and giving that to the C-section babies to get the microbiome in them. But on the other end, I'm wondering, and that's how we kind of get a better start from the beginning for them. But I'm wondering on the other end, and I saw on one of your slides, fecal transplantation. I know that's happening in other countries. Are we doing that? What is that looking like here? Not that I'm saying that I would want to do that, but some people are already, they are deep in Crohn's, they're deep in IBS, they're deep in these inflammatory illnesses, and it sounds like the science is saying that can help to heal quicker. Then ideally after that, we go to the plant-based diet. So what are your thoughts on fecal transplants?
Okay, so first of all, the vaginal swabbing for C-section babies, Dr. Domingos Bellos has been doing a lot of that work, and she's really amazing. And she's the first person who really reported that babies that are born by C-section, that for at least the first beginning of their life, their microbiome looks like skin microbiome. And so, that swabbing, again, we need more research, but honestly, if I was having a baby by C-section, I would want to do that. And fecal transplants, I think they're going to be miraculous. However, the only accepted use for them from the FDA right now is for people with recurrent Clostridium difficile infections. We're starting to see in the literature some really good reports on people with various autoimmune conditions. We're starting to, like Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis. We're starting to see like 50% of people with ulcerative colitis with a couple of fecal transplants no longer have ulcerative colitis. In Crohn's disease, it's about a third of them. So you go, wow, well, if I could get rid of this disease by doing a couple of these, it sounds really icky, but if I could do this and be healthy, well, isn't that something instead of living with this disease? And there are physicians on, all over the country who are doing kind of off-label uses of fecal transplants. And they're having some really good results. However, we've also had a couple of deaths from fecal transplants. And so the FDA is, of the millions that have been done, there have been a couple of deaths. And the FDA is really kind of clamping down. And so, again, we need to start seeing the research, getting more experimental approval for doing some of these things. And in the big teaching hospitals, that's happening. So in 5 years, I think we'll see more. Dr. Tom Barodi in Australia has been doing this work for over 30 years, and his results are pretty amazing. So, I personally think that we may start seeing a real change. I know in the African American community, 80% of women are obese or overweight. And I'm looking at this as a possible weight loss program, because we know that shifting the microbiome is probably going to be one of the key answers in weight loss, permanent weight loss. And I'm also really hoping that we're going to see huge breakthroughs with fecal transplants, or what they call poop pills, that I'm hoping that we're going to really see breakthroughs in mental health as well. So, it's a very, very interesting emerging field, and one I'm very interested in.
Wow, that's fascinating. We're getting toward the end of our time, but this has been a very fascinating topic. What I want to do is I'm putting in the on the banner. If anyone has any questions, email us at fnl@montgomeryheart.com. I've already shared this in the chat, and I think we'll get a lot of good information to you. We'll respond to your questions. We try to address as many questions, but this is a very, very broad topic. And, I feel bad because I probably should have had a conversation with you first, Dr. Lipsky, and we probably should have done a 2 or 3 part show. But be that as it may, we can always recover. I think this is a very great overview, and I highly recommend the book Digestive Wellness. I plan to get a copy myself. I've yet to have time to read it. I've got 2 books in front of it, but I think I may have to put this on my nightstand as well. Because if I would imagine the information you share with us is in this book, right? Is that correct?
It is. I'd also encourage people to go to my website. I have a digestive health questionnaire. So it breaks down your digestion into 15 parts and can give you insights as to where you might be wobbling out of balance. And can also, it can also give you something to take into your doctor's office and say, look, I filled out this questionnaire and it points to maybe gluten as being an issue. Could you test me for celiac? Or it points to, it could be leaky gut, or I might need more digestive enzymes. And maybe I benefit from taking enzymes, so you try that. So, I always liked questionnaires. When I was younger, I'd read Cosmo and I'd fill out all those questionnaires about dating and whatever. But, I think filling out questionnaires and getting information about ourselves, what I find my students tell me is either they got really good information or they found that all the changes that they've already made them so much healthier than they were a few years ago. And then some people go, hey, my digestion's actually in pretty good shape because I scored really low. So that's at dhaq.info if you want to just download that.
Great. And we've got this slide, and we'll share this information also in our notes when we publish this talk. Again, this is a wonderful, wonderful talk. And as usual, I learned a lot, and I really learned a lot. I'm definitely going to get this questionnaire and use it myself. I found it to be, this is a very fascinating topic. And I think it's one where we, as clinicians, will benefit greatly from, and certainly our patients will. And I think it's going to go a long way toward helping out. So I'm going to look at your questionnaire and certainly get the book. Dr. Lipsky, let me just go ahead and say on the record and in front of our witnesses, we'd love to have you come back. And I'll probably have a conversation with you, and maybe we can do a 1 or 2 part series on the digestive tract to cover some of these broad areas. Obviously the microbiome will be heart and center into this, but I'll consider this as a great overview because, my eyebrows are, at my hairline, which is pretty far up my head. But anyway, it's a fascinating topic. But thank you very much for such a presentation. So I'll see you guys backstage after I close out the show. As always, it's wonderful doing these topics because I learned so much. And for those of you who had questions we didn't get to, email us at FNL, that's FNL as in Fresh Natural Live at MontgomeryHeart.com. Email your questions and we will review them and get it back to you. I'll also maybe email them to Dr. Lipsky and get her input on some of those questions. So we look forward to hearing those questions, especially if you didn't get them answered tonight. But we really look forward to next week, and we look forward to hearing more of your questions in the chat. Next week, we'll be talking about the non-toxic home. So Dr. Floyd Atkins will be working with us, leading a discussion rather, on how to detoxify your home. The human body is an environment. As we talked about today, the microbiome is really an ecosystem. And you think about our health, we have to think about our body as our most local ecosystem. But if we think about the ecosystem that's beyond the body, it's our environment. And we talked about some of that today. If you grew up on a farm or didn't grow up on a farm, or if you've got, particle board and, shelves in your house. So these things are all part of our ecosystem. And so when we think about our health, we need to think about our ecosystem, and it thinks about our local community, then our community around us, the things that are around us, chemicals around us, the people around us, the thoughts around us, et cetera. So we're going to start to expand our ecosystem look when we talk about the non-toxic home. But until then, we want you to keep it fresh, natural, and live.